Fabrica Dominique aeta inaru David Chavez diri boriken arawak kiwaro tainondaka hahongwaitiao. Welcome, I'm Dominique David Chavez. I have multicultural heritage, Indigenous Caribbean, and I am presenting to you from Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne traditional homelands in the United States, where I work as a postdoctoral fellow with Native Nations Institute and as a researcher and educator with Colorado State University. I'm going to share a few key findings and resources from ongoing research where we are working to center Indigenous governance in climate and environmental science research. And I'm grateful to be part of this panel and have an opportunity to show how we're supporting Indigenous data stewards to bridge from research to community. In our Native communities, Indigenous knowledge systems based on centuries and millennia of observations of Earth, time, and space have guided our communities to adapt to changes on the Earth as they've been passed down from generation to generation. And we're seeing just a recent shift now where rather than these knowledges being largely ignored or appropriated by the science community, there's an increasing interest in including Indigenous knowledge systems in research, such as represented in these quotes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where they recognize the importance of including local and Indigenous knowledge systems for the security of those communities and for a resource for all of humankind to adapt to the increasing changes we're seeing from human-induced climate change. So one of the questions I've asked in my past research is how are these knowledges included in climate research, and more importantly, how are the people, the community members who maintain that knowledge engaged in the research? And this is a scale of levels of Indigenous community engagement, ranging from no engagement up through Indigenous or extractive research up through self-determined. Upon conducting a global systematic review, where I ended up analyzing 20 years of climate studies, 140 different publications, I found that the majority, nearly 9 out of 10 of these studies, practice an extractive form of research that really tells a story of how legacies of colonization are seeping into the research process. There's a publication on the bottom left there if you're interested in learning more. Yet there are a handful of studies and numerous grassroots community efforts that live on this end of the scale. And so I'm curious also what resources we have to guide self-determined research, where we can uphold Indigenous data sovereignty through every stage of the research process. And this scale really looked at who held authority and governance in that research process. So here are some of those resources. We have numerous ones to guide us on this pathway, also for decolonizing science work and reconciliation that's needed in these fields. And these include ethical frameworks at every geographic scale, from tribal up to international. And as pictured here, also the importance of listening to elders in our community, such as this abuela or grandmother from our Indigenous Caribbean island community. Yet here in the US, for example, we lack a national standard of ethics when it comes to research on and with Indigenous lands and communities, and have yet to see many of the principles outlined, for example, in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, translated into practice. So for our current National Science Foundation study led by Stephanie Russo-Carroll and myself, as well as Indigenous students, we're mentoring, and through guidance of an international advisory council, we're conducting an analysis of Indigenous guiding frameworks, such as those included here and presented by our earlier panelists, to identify key values and principles represented within them, which will apply to assess current US research standards for federally funded environmental science research. And we're just now wrapping up our content analysis of 32 Indigenous ethics frameworks for guiding research, in which we've identified the following core principles that speak to key responsibilities we have for accountability on the part of researchers to land, to community, to data, to honoring the past, and to caring for our future. Within each of these, we're identifying specific methods and mechanisms for applying these values and principles in practice, which we hope to learn from and apply in future researcher trainings and policy development. And additionally, we're grounding this work in support of one of our greatest community resources for resilience, our Indigenous data stewards. So here's a few examples of Native scientists working on environmental science research who are reshaping their fields to center relational accountability and Indigenous governance in this work. As the most pressing challenges become more clear, we want to consider how we are supporting our current and future generations to access all relevant ways of knowing, to guide future decisions and policy that can protect our lands, languages, and lifeways. And I'd also include our next panelist and final panelist among these Indigenous data stewards, and look forward to his presentation. And so I'll leave you with the question of who are Indigenous data stewards in your own community. And with that, I say hahom, gracias, and thank you to those who pay the bills, to the organizers and sponsors of this event, and to all of you for joining us today. Hahom.